Welcome to today's webinar titled Delphi or Not Delphi, Selecting the Appropriate Expert Elicitation Approach, sponsored by ISPOR corporate partner Open Health. Before we begin the webinar, I do have a few quick housekeeping reminders to go over. All attendees have joined in listen-only mode. The Zoom chat feature is disabled for this webinar. Please submit any questions to the speakers using the Q&A feature. Our speakers are looking forward to answering your questions after their presentations. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing via email to all registered attendees and on the ISPOR webinar series webpage in approximately 2 business days. This webinar is also using Zoom polling, and we encourage your participation. When the Zoom poll is launched, a window will automatically open on your screen with the question. If the window does not open, or if you close the poll window by mistake, click on the polling icon within your Zoom toolbar to reopen. Select your answer from the choices or type your response back if a text box appears, and click Submit to lock in your answer. It is now my pleasure to invite today's moderator to begin the webinar.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Nick Denham. I'm a senior real world evidence consultant at Open Health. I'm joined by my colleague Adeli, who's a research consultant within the patient-centered outcomes team at Open Health. Emanuele, a JCE coordinator from UCB, and last but not least, Valentina, who's the executive director at the European Patients Forum. We'll be presenting to you today on sort of Delphi or not to Delphi. As has been said, if you have any questions throughout, please do message them into the chat and we'll be able to answer where we can. So to go into the first slide, so my section, I'm going to talk about some different structured expert elicitation methods and why we would undertake a structured expert elicitation study. So on the first slide, please, why would you undertake one? So when data is limited, how can we produce transparent, reproducible, and defensible estimates for decision making? We require multiple opinions, not just a single viewpoint. A formal systematic process, not informal discussions that you're having between different colleagues or partners, a formal system. We need to elicit uncertainty from experts. And finally, we need to combine these opinions in a controlled way by avoiding conflict and watered down compromises, as quite often occurs. On the next slide, so how would we create a reliable structured expert elicitation? We need to define the problem clearly. You would come up with an example such as, why are patients taken off of drug X because of Y? That's our problem that we're going to discuss. We need to identify what quantities we want to elicit. Is that probabilities, percentages, days, if it's to come about why we need to take patients off? We want to understand that first. We need to pick experts with relevant knowledge and a diversity of perspectives. We don't want 20 experts all from the same hospital in London. We want a difference across geographies, experiences, therapeutics areas where possible. Make that a nice wide team to get the best range of opinions and elicitations that you can. We also want to balance the method with the timelines and costs. Some methods may take days, some may take months, and of course, costing as well. When we're contracting with different experts, where possible, things may take quite a bit of time. So you really need to put that into perspective beforehand. You also need to avoid complex designs and methodologies. We're working with some of the best experts in the world in their field. They have valuable time. We do not want to be wasting time trying new technologies, new webinar formats. Keep it simple. Questionnaires, meetings that everyone knows and experiences, so you get the best value out of the time you have with these experts. And finally, you need to select the right protocol. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples of different protocols. The first one on the next slide being SHELF, the Sheffield Elicitation Framework. You may have heard of these before, which is brilliant, but if not, what SHELF is it's a facilitated group process where experts discuss and agree on single consensus probability distributions. It focuses on a qualitative measure while emphasizing transparency and shared understanding. It's really to be used in economic models and HTAs where you need to use defensible distributions. Rather than saying we assumed this value, we're trying to say this distribution reflects structured expert consensus under a validated protocol. How it works is experts provide individual judgment on uncertainty. Then a facilitated structure is in place used to reconcile views, ultimately producing a single consensus probability distribution. There's a couple of theoretical examples there. But on the next slide, I'll walk you through a real life published example, which is really interesting and great to see how it works. So in this case, they're informing long-term survival extrapolations using alternate parameter distributions. What you can see on the left-hand side is real-world data. These are the long-term survival applications over 2 years under these people, under the trial conditions. What you can see at 3, 5, and 10 years is when 6 experts were asked to come together, look at the real data, and discuss their opinions. And in the publication, you can see as well, expert 1 said this, expert 2 said this. We don't name the experts, but you can discuss what they said individually. Finally, they all came together to decide on a consensus on what these models may look like based on their opinion. And you can see with the pink arrows pointing to the brown data points there. On the next slide, you'll be able to see what models were undertaken on just the real-world data. The consensus, the brown data points, that's just there for visualization. So you can see what the models look like without their data, without the expert data input. And on the next slide, we can see what we look like where the data has been input. You can see how the models change, how that the expert opinion has been brought into the models to bring the change in outputs. On the next slide, I'm going to discuss the nominal group technique. What this is a structured group method where experts independently generate and rank ideas, provide structured, unbiased way to identify and prioritize key drivers, assumptions, or outcomes when empirical evidence is limited, rather than saying we pick these drivers based on informal discussion. What we're trying to say is these priorities were systematically generated and ranked by experts using structured and biased processes. Effectively, what we're doing is we're bringing experts to individually generate ideas, share them together in a group space, and then from their discussions and their new learnings and what they've had from those discussions, rank them to produce a prioritized list of outcomes. Again, putting some theoretical examples there. On the next slide, we can see a real life example. This is also a virtual example. So many of these formats require in-person meetings, but you can adjust them accordingly to do it virtually, especially post-COVID. I'm going back to when I referenced experts' time is valuable. You'll be able to get experts for an hour or 2 hours remotely compared to trying to fly in 8 experts from around the world for a couple of days to have a single meeting. So in this case, the experts were trying to rank and prioritize clinical indicators for applications in primary care research. Firstly, on the left-hand side, they were giving a survey to rank, I think it was about 20 characteristics. What do they think was the primary characteristics that we should be focusing on at prioritizing characteristics? They then had a meeting to discuss and rank these between them, discuss openly. Everyone gets to have their input and discuss. Following that, they had a second survey. This was asking them not to rank, but to score out of 100. And what you can see is how, following their discussions, their prioritizations changed, such as for heart failure. Originally, they thought it would be the 5th most prioritized aspect, and it's moved up to the 3rd, and this can continue throughout. It's a really good example of how it can be done virtually and used in practice as well. Finally, I'm going to discuss sort of 2 other sort of techniques. So there is on the next slide. Thank you. Yep, that's the one. The Cook's classical model. This is a really interesting model that, using calibration questions, it ranks experts' judgments. It really ask you to look into this yourself. It's a really good one, but it takes quite a while to explain and understand. Very exciting in use cases as well. What experts do is they independently provide probabilistic estimates, which, using their statistical evaluation on their calibration, it's combined through performance-based weighting to produce an aggregated distribution. Finally, there's the IDEA protocol, the investigate, discuss, estimate, and aggregate, which is a combination between the Cook's method and the modified Delphi. The modified Delphi we'll discuss together in a moment. On my final slide is just a table discussing the different um, different aspects of each of the protocols that we've discussed. So you can see how some are more mathematical based, asking for written input, behavioral based for their discussions, and the different strengths and limitations of each. For example, you can see in the shelf protocol, a limitation is that if you do not have a skilled facilitator, there's a very high chance that individual members and experts could overpower the discussion rather than letting some of the quieter experts involved as well. So what you really need to do is focus on why you want to undertake certain protocols, the resources you have available to you, what outcomes you're looking for. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Adele. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. And hello, everyone. I'm Adele, and I will be discussing in more detail the Delphi technique. So first of all, what is a Delphi? So a Delphi is defined as a method of eliciting and refining group judgments. If we look at the core purpose of Delphi, it's to generate consensus statements from a group of experts on complex issues that are characterized by uncertainty. And why is it relevant in healthcare research? Delphis can provide reputable and actionable evidence to inform payers and provider decision making when traditional clinical trials or literature are insufficient. But if we go to the next slide, please. Yes, what actually a Delphi looks like. In this slide, you can see generally the overview of a standard Delphi. So we start with our evidence gap and our research question. And this is followed by a stage of collection and revision of existing evidence. This is normally done by literature review, but there are also some qualitative steps that can be done, like focus groups or one-to-one interviews. And this is all to collect evidence to actually inform the development of a consensus survey. Once the consensus survey is developed, it's given to our experts, and this would be our Delphi panelists. And just to give you an idea, a Delphi panel can be composed from maybe 9 panelists, but depending also on the diversity required in the group, they can be much, much larger. And panelists are asked to complete the survey, and then the responses are actually grouped and summarized in one group response. Then panelists are asked to complete the survey another time. But this time, when they will complete the survey, they'll be able to see for each item of the survey how their answer actually compares to the group response in the previous round. And so it starts this kind of iterative process where expert can actually every time refine their judgments also based on what they saw other participants actually answered in previous rounds. And this can go on for a predetermined number of rounds. It can be 2, 3, 4, or it can be up until certain level of consensus has been achieved, or yes, or when we observe a stability of response. And after that, the researchers can actually analyze and synthesize the areas where consensus is achieved, or areas where no consensus has been achieved. And they can also review the feedback, the qualitative feedback that experts will be asked also to provide while responding to the survey, to better contextualize also the consensus that has been achieved, and also better understand why certain areas remained without agreement. And if we go to the next slide, please. Yes, if we look at some key methodological characteristics of Delphi panels, so when we talk about a consensus survey, it's a survey that consists of statements that are derived indeed from this literature synthesis step and qualitative data collection step that I was mentioning before. And panelists are asked to express their level of agreement with the statements using standardized Likert scales. And normally these go from strongly disagree to strongly agree. A very important characteristic of Delphi that it's not always the case in many other similar study design, is the anonymity of participants. So participants remain anonymous to one another throughout the entire survey process, and this prevents dominant personalities or authority figures to actually skew the results and avoid groupthink. Then the other two important characteristics are the iteration and the control feedback that I was mentioning before when we were looking at the study flow. So the expert actually respond to the survey on multiple rounds. They can refine their judgments every time, and they can refine them because they will be able to see the anonymized summary of results that they will be provided. That basically summarizes the results of the previous rounds. And this kind of encourage them to converge into one response and provide the correct answer. But when we say correct, we don't mean that every answer in the end has to converge to a consensus, but we just mean that every time, just by looking at what their colleague have responded, they're just sure that they are provided the answer that is correct for themselves. And then finally, just to show you that the Delphi panels have reached qualitative input that then are grouped into statistical group responses, and results are presented as statistical aggregate. It can be median, mean scores. It can be also percentages of agreement and of disagreement, and this provide a sense of objectivity also of the results. And if we go to the next slide. Yes, just briefly, some of the main strengths of this design. As Nick was mentioning also before, Delphi are very helpful for closing evidence gaps in the literature areas where literature is conflicting. They're relatively cost and time effective projects, so nowadays they're normally done online. So they are significantly faster and more cost effective than having, for instance, to organize a series of in-person meetings. And for the same reason, they also allowed for wide geographic flexibilities. And then, regarding the informed judgments, they're excellent because they help translating nuances of clinical decision making into actual data that can support then strategic planning. And next slide, please. If we Yes, thanks. So if we look at some different approaches to conducting a Delphi panel, the traditional approach, it's normally used for very early stage research question areas where there is very limited prior evidence, so exploratory areas. The consensus statement survey is actually developed together with the panelists. So the first round is normally questionnaire with open-ended question, and the results are actually used to develop the statements themselves. And this is one of the main difference of traditional Delphi with the modified Delphis, because modified Delphis have actually a steering committee that supports the development of the consensus survey, and the steering committee is a group, a very limited group of experts that actually supports the development of the survey. So by the time that the survey gets to the panelist, it has already gone through kind of step of revision from the steering committee. And this makes them a little bit more efficient, a little bit more structured, and reduces slightly the participants' burden. However, these modified Delphis do have to be done in areas where some prior literature and evidence is available. Then finally, we have the real-time Delphi. Real-time Delphi, the rationale behind them, it's very similar to the one of the modified Delphis. The only difference, it's really the consensus process. So these ones are also called roundless Delphi because they don't really have a structured rounds like the ones that I was explaining before, but rather the survey goes online, and participants can actually see as they respond to the survey, they can see automatically the group response. The only limit of this option is that sometimes, for instance, for participants that participate they complete the survey very early on, they might not be able to compare it with the answer of many other participants because they have not yet completed. So the researchers have actually a bit less control to how many times the panelists actually go into the survey and complete it. But they are very useful for very time-sensitive projects. And then if we go to the next slide, please. Yes, so to just go back to the first question of the webinar, Delphi or not Delphi, I just wanted to highlight a few applications of Delphi. The first one would be clinical standardization and clinical pathway optimization. So Delphi can be very useful in all those areas, for instance, where we want to look at optimal sequence or duration of certain therapy. They're also good to position a product into the clinical pathway. The evidence can be used also to inform the development of guidelines. We can look, for instance, at consensus on dosing. Another interesting application is to inform economic models in those areas where real-world data is actually missing. Delphi panel and the experience of experts can actually help to estimate, for instance, the frequency and the type of medical services that are required by a certain patient population, or what could be the expected uptake of a therapy. And then the data standardization and evaluation framework. Delphis can be helpful because they can support indeed with developing diagnosis criteria, definition. They can also support the development of key indicators of metrics or metrics that can be used to evaluate the technologies. And actually, this will be the focus of the next presentation. Here, I just wanted to highlight a couple of examples. In case you're interested, we can provide the links. It's just to show you how Delphis can be used in this for these mentioned applications. Then if we go into the next slide. Yes, in this last slide, I just wanted to bring up a few methodological guidelines, some literature that are available to guide the conducting and also reporting of Delphi panels. These are all relatively recent work that also highlight how Delphi are there is a growing interest in this methodology, and indeed also in standardizing and increasing the quality of this methodology. So we have the RAN methodological guidelines, Accord, and Delphi started actually report on the guidelines for reporting Delphi panels. And I've just highlighted a few criteria on the right that can be kept in mind when should be kept in mind when conducting a Delphi, but also when actually reviewing or reading an article reporting on a Delphi. To keep in mind for this quality kind of parameters. So some criteria that have to be set a priori, the definition of experts, how were they defined, the consensus threshold, and what was the evidence base for the consensus statements. And this was my last slide, so I will hand over to Emanuele, but before that, there should be a poll. Yes, we have a little question for you, so just to warm you up for the next session, and I hand over to you, Emanuele.
All
Perfect.
right, everyone.
Yeah.
The poll should be launched. Do you guys see it live on your screen?
Yes, I can see it at least.
Perfect.
And I'm going to answer. Oh, no, I cannot vote. Well,
yeah,
yes. So
you might not be able to vote as a panelist.
No, indeed. I think we wanted to get an idea of the familiarity you have with these methods, specifically in the context of HTA, before we deep dive a bit into a case study that we did with a European Patient Forum and AMDA. I will talk about it a little bit more in details, especially in relation to JCA, and great timing because it came out last week. So we're going to deep dive at the end also on some of the learnings and how maybe this could have, in our opinion, facilitated the process, but that will be up to Valentina to talk about it. So yeah, should we wait maybe a few more seconds? Okay, we can see the results. Great. So over 50% of you are not familiar with this methodology in the context of HTA. In previous research, it has been used for several aspects, and there is a growing trend to use it. And we hope that in the following case study that we will discuss, we, are able to let you think together of whether some of these methods can be used further, especially on the challenges that JCA and more broadly the HTA landscape, policy landscape poses in front of us. Cool. So without further ado, please, if you can, yes, go to the next slide. We'll present with, I will present the work that we did with Valentina from European Patient Forum. I'm currently a JCI coordinator at UCB, but this exercise was conducted while I was at Open Health with Adele and the support of Valentina, and most importantly, EAMDA that you see at the bottom there. So what did we want to do? We had the idea to, address some of the picoscoping concerns, and especially with the focus on patients, right? Patient engagement, as the European HTA regulations offers a unique opportunity for patient engagement and stakeholder engagement more broadly, so also clinician, in the picoscoping process and the JCA process, as you're all very well aware. So we said, you know what, why don't we try with patients what it means to consolidate, not only explaining and negotiating in maybe an informal way, but maybe using a methodology that allows to drive consensus. And that was exactly what we tried to do. Building on what Adele presented, we used the modified Delphi to generate indeed consensus over several PICO items. And the first thing we did was actually testing and engaging with several patient associations across key disease area, of course, related to some of the key ongoing JCA activities. And we landed on CAR-T, given the uniqueness of the therapeutic landscape and the challenges that it poses for picoscoping, but most importantly, we thought it would have been the highest added value in terms of patient inputs, right? So we had the pleasure and extreme value that we had to collaborate with the EAMDA, the European Alliance of Neuromuscular Disorder, that was key to select and identify the patients. And we ended up with 12 panelists, including both patients and caregivers included. So if you go to the next slide, please. Right. Objectives, methodology, and there is one more, expected results. So let me guide you through a bit of our thinking. Objective, very simple. We wanted to obtain consensus, patient expert consensus on the PICO elements and see how this will, minimize heterogeneity across Europe. There were 3 underlying objectives behind this main objective, and these are more policy / context objective. First and foremost, increase the scientific validity of consensus of PICO consolidation and patient input, and increase transparency. So better understanding how stakeholder inputs and the consolidation process was shaped across the different stages, and therefore being able to actually, to a certain extent, replicate, but understand where the driver of consensus or dissent are. Of course, these, in our opinion, would have also allowed for a structured and consistent patient engagement from the very beginning. And we will see later a bit in explaining this exercise and explaining the UHTA regulation to patients. We were thinking of ensuring consistent engagement across the different rounds and also in the UHTA process. Finally, of course, this exercise repeated over and over would allow patient associations, PAGs, and researchers to promote this cross-border collaboration and be able in the future to replicate this process, to synthesize European needs, European healthcare system differences, to finally get to a more simplified European voice, acknowledging all the differences. Therefore, what we followed was a modified Delphi panel. We wanted a minimum of 12 panelists, and I'm happy to say that there was not a problem at all. The engagement was very high. We filled in the positions very quickly. And after that, we developed the survey together with the steering committee that was composed of a clinician, 2 clinicians from 2 different countries with slightly different profiles, a policy expert and a patient expert. The steering committee members were not part of the panelists, but they drove a lot of the survey and the selection criteria, which we show in a bit to select the relevant panelist. Then we had 3 rounds. First round with interviews, 101 with each panelist, where we actually discussed with them what this exercise was about, often going into a detail of what is a PICO, what it means to do PICO scoping in the UHTA context. So it was extremely valuable to share those insights and, most importantly, guide the panelists through the different questions and record the meeting so that then we could transcribe the qualitative inputs to better shape the statements down the line. And I will discuss it briefly later. What we did then, we are aggregating consensus for each of the rounds, as Adele has explained, both in qualitative and quantitative terms, share it back to the panelists, particularly for those items where we didn't reach consensus, and where there were open, new items coming up from the qualitative analysis. And we did that across 3 rounds. So